ideology to again draw the knowledge of a creator away from his people. They introduced secret societies like the Illuminati, the Jesuits, the Freemasons, who would use the Hegelian principle to enact policies that they know would be uncomfortable for people. And when I say Hegelian principle, I mean you have your status quo, which is your thesis, but instead of what we have now, they want something else, which is almost opposite to where we are now. So instead of just implementing that unpopular position, they would introduce an antithesis to the thesis. That antithesis would bring about an unfavorable condition in society to where people go from that status quo to calling for a change. That change is the synthesis, which is what the establishment wanted all along. And that's the Hegelian principle, where they enact something by introducing something that makes the current situation miserable. And then, of course, you had the introduction of secular humanism, atheism, evolution, communism, all these ideas that erase the knowledge of a creator from our minds and introduce man-centered, man-based ideology, religion. Of course, you have the world wars, which were religious world wars. You have capitalism, which creates a gulf between the ruling classes and the poor. And of course, the educational system where all of this would be implemented. That gave rise to a new age or spiritualistic movement. In Revelation 17 and 18, early verses in 18 talk about that. You have thought leaders like Helena Blavatsky, Luciferians like Alice A. Bailey and Albert Pike, who was a Klansman, but he actually wrote this book, Morals and Dogma, which is sort of the Bible of Freemasonry, if you will. And it really exposes the idea that Freemasonry is actually a Luciferian religion. You have false religions like the Baha'i movement, Mormonism, and then, of course, Hollywood, which is one of the biggest spiritualistic propagators out there. Of course, Hollywood, which a warlock's magic wand was a piece of wood made of holly. And John Dewey, he was a secular humanist, and it was his ideologies that got put into the educational system. Of course, and all this would be propagated worldwide through the United Nations, which is a religious organization. And then in 1962, from 62 to 1965, you had the Vatican II movement, which essentially sought to bring all the world's churches under its umbrella in this world ecumenical movement that gave rise to modern Bible translations, which distort the truth and sort of water down the truth. And then you have these Freemasons come into Christianity, Robert Schuller with his teachings, and then of course you have popular teachers like Rick Warren with his needs-based religion. It's no longer focusing on heaven, it's strictly focusing on what's going on here on earth. Of course, I spoke of the condition of Laodicea with moral relativism, and truth becomes relative to the individual's paradigm and not according to scripture. And then this idea of pantheism, where now God is in everything. You see a caterpillar, God, that's God. You see a tree, that's God. And so this whole spiritualism movement really just completely, now that the majority of people's eyes are away from a knowledge of a creator, now we're just all over the place. And basically an individual becomes their own God and with their own version of their own truth. And what's up next for us is the reunion of church and state, because back here with the deadly wound, that's when there was a separation of church and state. Of course, the woman was in the wilderness behind the scenes. As an evangelist I referred to in the last study, Moses Mason, said, this is just an example of Satan playing both ends towards the center. And of course, Revelation 17, that's now we have the seventh kingdom. This is the false prophet. This is when world leaders now start to unite. The 10 kings of the earth give their power and authority unto the beast, but which is a little bit later on, I should say. You're going to have economic decline. We're actually starting to see that now. I think the foundation is being laid for that future economic decline. Of course, climate change being a big part of the discussion right now. And the truth of it all is, if you understand the reality of the cosmos according to Scripture, you can see that, okay, if in fact things are warming up, it only makes sense in the true nature of the cosmos, not the cosmos that's predicted on television and movies. Then there's going to be this latter rain call out of this spiritual Babylon, and that's what you see in the three angels' messages of Revelation 14, verses 6 through 13, and that's echoed in Revelation 18, verses 1 through 5. And that's going to allow the deadly wound to be healed. That is the reunion of church and state. That is the eighth kingdom of Revelation 17, which it says is of the seven. Okay, it says the eighth kingdom is of the seven. So that means that essentially the fifth kingdom, which is the spiritual kingdom of Rome, which is currently behind the scenes,